Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets received a trade request from Kyrie Irving and in short order found a partner and executed a trade that brought back picks and players in return for the all-star caliber talent. We break down Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, what it means in the short and long term for Brooklyn and Kevin Durant, and what could happen next with the deadline still several days away.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. I am Adam Armbrecht. We always thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode, it's brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match for up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. And Doug, another pseudo-emergency podcast as we wondered if a trade partner would be found for Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets, where that would be, and what they would get in return. It comes in on a Sunday. Yep, I got that right. It's a Sunday, as reported first by Shams Charania, picked up by Woj and all the other major outlets in short order. The nuts and bolts, Doug, that I want to get your take on. Kyrie Irving to the Dallas Mavericks, along with Markieff Morris, can't forget him, in exchange for 2029 first-round pick, 2027 and 2029 second-round picks, and most importantly, players Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith. How do you feel about this?
Oh, man, there's so much to get into here. I feel lots of different ways. Sometimes when you're in this kind of business, you sort of plan around days and days you don't think anything is going to happen. Sunday afternoon, as I was out of the house, I was like, well, there's nothing going to happen here. This is the days away from the trade deadline. We'll get into this later in the week. This is just not when superstar stuff tends to happen. Like, that's just not how the NBA landscape is sort of set up. It is kind of wait to the last second, see who has the best deal. There's lots of reasons why I think it did happen today that we'll get into that kind of just speak to the long-term and maybe even short-term trajectory of the team. Overall, just on a high level that we'll break down on individual pieces here, I actually think this was a W for the Nets. With the stipulation, with one asterisk to this. I think this is a W with the Nets with the current considerations around what was happening with Kyrie. Like, in a vacuum, Kyrie Irving for this would be not great, right? Kyrie Irving just, on a contract and whatever, and the talent and everything, this would not be a great trade for the Nets because you're not getting anywhere close to the talent back. That being said, we understand that was not the case where the Nets were with this situation. It looked like Kyrie Irving was definitely ready to dig his heels in on the request. I think when we factor in those pieces to it, this return and what it could mean for them, like what could happen next, both in a lot of different scenarios, by the way. Like, yes. I think there's lots of ways this could go. This provides flexibility in some of that, and the timing actually helps them too. So I think overall, I'm like, okay, I can see it. And I'll always say, you almost never want to be the team that sends the best player out. Like, that is almost always a loss. Like, when you send the best player out, it is. And there's no question that Kyrie on a basketball court is the best player in this trade, like by far. You're almost always losing in that sense, but there's so many other pieces to this that I think that in general, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of more than I thought they were going to get back.
Yeah, and so there are. We'll talk about what it means here coming up ahead of the deadline, because already you're getting the sense, and it was reported by Adrian Wojnarowski in the full article here after highlighting the trade pieces that came back in this trade with the Dallas Mavericks. He went on to say the Nets plan to offer the picks acquired in the trade as well as their 2023 first-round pick via the Philadelphia 76ers in trade talks to try to improve this roster ahead of the Thursday deadline. So there's already this looming element of, well, before you even evaluate the Kyrie Irving trade, we're going to have to wait for this other thing that's, potentially going to happen in the next couple of days. And that speaks just to your point about when you execute this trade this quickly ahead of the deadline. Yeah. It is quickly just from when the request got made, but with still a few days ahead of it. It's funny is the wrong word, but When Kevin Durant made the trade request, it was, hey, we're going to make the phone calls. We're going to see what's available. But this very quickly became obvious that the Brooklyn Nets, whatever the conversations were on the contracts and wherever the hangups became on either side, there was just a clear sense that this is not going to work. And you can argue the case that when Kyrie Irving said, well, if we're not coming to terms, then I want the trade request, that could have very well blindsided Brooklyn, just in the idea of we're negotiating, we're trying to get across the line. Maybe it takes until the offseason, all of those things. Once that happened, it looks like the organization said, okay, let's go ahead and start to move here as quickly as possible to get it done. And I'm sure if you're talking with the Clippers, the Lakers, the Suns, and the Mavericks, this isn't about let's have some slow moving talks here. It's give me your best final rate now because we want this to be done with enough time to be able to go back to the market and continue to build this team. Let
me jump in on that because there's a couple things. Let's just talk Kyrie Irving here for a second before we get to the trade pieces. I think it's very clear, like you just said, and you make a great point about the timing and like what it sort of else it signals around how quickly it happened and how quickly the request came. I think what's very clear is the Nets wanted to be out of the Kyrie Irving business.
Yep.
And we're probably happy to be given the like very loud option to be able to get out of it. Right. Yes. Like I think it actually in some ways probably did them a massive favor for him to request it. And I'm only judging this by what it sounds like their contract offers were to him, how quickly this was executed, how there was really never any talk of we're going to try to work it out. Like none of that was voiced at all. It was like, who wants them? I'm paraphrasing, but like that seemed to be very much the tenor. And you can really quickly compare it to sort of just what the difference between his request and Kevin Durant's request, right? Like the Durant request was, we're going to have you back, pal. Like we'll take an offer and it better blow us away. Right. After that, see you in October because you're still on the team and we want to be in the Kevin Durant business. I think that this is so clear that they were just like totally done with it. They were going to go forward with it. They had massive protections around their own team and sanity, right? Mm-hmm. And from their own point of view. And once that was not received well, they were like, cool. Like just you can do business somewhere else. So I think from that standpoint, whether it's right or wrong, and I know that there's Kyrie Irving stands out there that will say that he was done wrong here. Look, I can see both sides of this scenario, really. I can see the Kyrie Irving side for sure. I can see the Nets side for sure on this. But I think it's so crystal clear. It's like when the request happened, Friday afternoon, like formally, Friday afternoon. We're like 48 hours into this thing, right. And he's gone. Like players of his caliber on a request, that never moves that quick, ever. Like, and I think it's just like the Nets was like saying, you just did us a huge favor. We will trade you. It could be 75 cents or 60 cents on the dollar. No problem. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to be done with this and we're going to move on.
And it's funny to I keep saying funny, but it's interesting too, because remember, going back to the offseason, Kevin Durant's trade request came after Kyrie Irving opted into the final year of his deal. And because then we started having the conversation, well, if Kevin Durant gets traded, remember, there was a time when it was Kyrie Irving came out saying, even if Kevin Durant is traded, I still want to be here and a part of the Brooklyn Nets long term. So the other element to this was, how is it potentially going to impact Kevin Durant? And that was depending on what you bring back and what moves come up here as well. But that notion that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were so tied together, I think we can go ahead and separate those two parties very equally, along with the fact that no one was aware. Kevin Durant, the rest of the team, everyone was surprised by the trade request. So in that regard, I think it also gives the Brooklyn Nets the ability to say, okay, at a minimum, we're going to have the rest of this season and probably the off season to discuss with Kevin Durant and formulate the team around him that's still going to make him feel like he can win long-term here. So those, to your point, a lot of safeguards for the Brooklyn Nets when it comes to making a move like this. On top of which, if we just look now, well, I'll say too, because you said we don't need to go back and relitigate any of the things. At all the stops along the way, I expressed a lot of frustration around Kyrie Irving and the decisions away from basketball that he was making. But as I said in the last episode, we discussed, you want to make the trade request? All good. Like, it's okay. It's your prerogative. I don't hold any of it against Kyrie on a personal level. From a basketball standpoint, this makes sense. It makes sense for this thing to not be the operation anymore. And you and I had that conversation around what it could be. And so one thing I'll say about, yes, he's clearly the best player in this deal. We'll see what else happens. But I have a 4-year sample size of how things have worked with Kyrie Irving as a part of the plan to try to win a championship. It hasn't worked. So that also, I think, is a perfectly good impetus to say we need to try something different. When we turn
and
on,
I think, and I just think, just to put a pin on that, I think that it was just so clear. Like it was just like everyone wanted to get away from this too. So at that point, what are we rolling the stone uphill for any party, right? Like, and I think that's just to, put a pin on that. Like, I think that's just why you see the speed at which this is executed. Cause again, I can't really like overstate this. This never happens this quick.
Like, we were talking about how would it be possible to get something done of real value with only
I thought
5
it
or
was
6 days.
I was, because there was rumors that came out that he wanted a 4-year deal, and that was what was holding the Lakers back. And I was like, oh man, this isn't going to happen. Like, these guys are so far apart. So to execute it along those lines so quickly, it just is like, this is complete light speed in the NBA for a player as good as Kyrie. And by the way, players that aren't as good as Kyrie don't make trade requests. So like, there is this like very small universe of players who even would bother making the request, right? Like, it's pretty small. You need to be like long-standing veteran or amazing. Like, there's like, and that player pool is really, really small. So anyway, the speed at which this moved on was, even by NBA standards, like faster than you'll ever see.
Of course. Now, the other part of this is at least the initial players that come in here, which it's funny. In the moment you go, I can say the return of the entrepreneur, Spencer Dinwiddie to Brooklyn. You love that. Dorian Finney-Smith, really great. And there's a brief pause where I go, now, are these players going to definitely be here? Or, we talk about this next move. I believe that both of these players will be here. I think that these are key pieces that they can work with. We'll talk about Dinwiddie in a second here, but on Dorian Finney-Smith, just to highlight, he signed the 40-year extension that booked 12.4 on 22-23 season, and then escalates to 13, 14, and a little bit north of 15 million through 2025-26. This, to me, when we talked about the players that they could try to target, who are they going to be able to bring in? He is 29 years old, so he's not a spring chicken, but his skill set and the value on the contract and the length of it, I thought that this was a somewhat critical piece. If you're going to have the negotiations with Dallas, getting Dorian Finney-Smith is pretty important, because there were other times we talked about Christian Wood, and that's just dumping a contract. These are guys that can be contributors this year and beyond, and Dinwiddie also under contract next season.
All right, want to get into the evaluation of this deal, want to get into the players that were put in here. Obviously, that's what people came for it too. The end of the Kyrie Irving era has now officially, ended in Brooklyn. We're going to get all into that in a second. First, we're going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Prize Picks, all you do is you put in picks just for the more or less on your entries. You're just going on the player projections, more points, more assists, more rebounds, more or less. Very, very easy. You're not trying to wrangle with salaries. You're not trying to just kind of go against a bunch of sharks in the water over there. It's just you versus the Prize Picks projections. You pick 2 to 6 players, figure out if they're going to score more or less on those projections. You can win up to 25 times your money. All the sports are available. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. Safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational in 30 states and Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
And so, as I'm obviously a pro's pro, I'm not out over my skis completely talking about the players and the whole situation, everything that's going on. As we dive back into it, then
it's a big day, buddy. It's a big day. There's lots going on. There's a million moving parts. It's like, I know. Look, I'm aware of the fact that like there's no good place to start with this stuff. It's like like just as a little look behind the curtain. 50 things just happened here. Right. Like, it's like Kyrie Irving got traded. What's it mean for Kevin Durant? Who are the players that are coming back? Who are the picks that are coming back? What else can happen? There's a million places to start. I think just taking 1 second to look at the Kyrie Irving situation, and we didn't even, I mean, believe me, we could do a 2-hour-long episode about this.
Oh yeah.
about Kyrie Irving and his time here and our time, which like almost 1-to-1 coincides covering the Nets. We basically started covering it 2 days after Kyrie got signed, right? So like our arc is, we get it here. Anyway, the picks, let's get into the trade.
Yeah, so Dorian Finney-Smith, obviously, and then Spencer Dinwiddie. So the things that I think are important when it comes to Spencer Dinwiddie, we know, by the way, in his time in Dallas, he's been a bit of a net killer, knocking down dagger buzzer beaters to beat the Brooklyn Nets. But we have familiarity with him and his skill set. Remember, this is a player who got injured 4 games into the season when you could have seen what it would have looked like to play with Kevin Durant and some of these other pieces. So this will be a new thing for him. But we understand you do get someone who can handle the ball. That kind of matters in a move like this because the Nets were already very thin at ball handlers. Great box to check. I'm going to turn over to Dorian Finney-Smith just because I think that his skill set is something that can immediately step in and be a massive factor. Playing 32 minutes a game this season with the Dallas Mavericks, he averages over 5 3-point attempts per game. The numbers are down from beyond the arc this year, but he's a career 36% shooter. He was almost 40% the last 2 seasons prior to this year. Decent at the free throw line, et cetera, et cetera. But the rebounds are there as well. A little bit more size here too. Even Spencer Dinwiddie, by the way. Like, these are both players that when you plug them in, the team gets collectively a little bit bigger. And I think that matters greatly as well. Do you like one or the other more in terms of the players coming back?
Well, I like Dinwiddie a lot more because he's a lot better. I think that I don't think that's really what you're asking. Am I glad they're both included? Yeah, for a lot of different reasons. Like, there's a lot of different reasons to like this trade for the Nets. This trade, it's interesting when you get stuff like this going because this trade for the Nets offers actually a lot of flexibility now about moving forward with other deals. It gives you 2 contracts to trade instead of 1 because there's no guarantee that these 2 guys are on the team going forward. Like, they could be put together in something else, right? Yeah. Like, we don't know what happens with these picks. So it does give flexibility around that. It gives you flexibility that they both can play now if you choose to keep them. And with getting it back, like, they could really use a guy like, whenever you let Kyrie Irving go, you need to bring back in scoring. And like, bringing back Dinwiddie is not Kyrie, and their games aren't even like similar even really, but we know that Dinwiddie can be on the ball a lot. We know he can run actually high pick and roll. They used to do this that's all they ran basically with Kenny Atkinson, right? Which was like
80% lobs. Come on now.
High pick and dive stuff that he'll probably get into with Claxton as a screener. Like, I think we're going to see a lot of that. We know he can run second unit stuff a lot. The defensive piece, he can switch, and he's actually pretty big. So we like that. You make a good point that we never got to see it because when he was hurt so early in that run, his last run with the Nets, to the point where actually, if you remember, in the playoffs that year, he had been cleared for basketball activities when they lost everybody in the playoffs. And we were even saying he's actually the exact guy they need right then. Yep. Like, during that playoff run when Kyrie and Harden got hurt and he was still technically on the team, there was like a little bit of questioning about whether he was actually going to come back. And we were like, actually, this would swing the series probably. Like, he's the exact dude at that time that they needed. They needed someone to be on the ball, to take some of the scoring off Durant, to be able to shoot some threes, be able to get to the rim. Like, he can do all those things. It's not as good as Kyrie, obviously, but like, that's great. I could say that about almost everybody in the NBA. Yeah. So I think getting him back will ease some of that load. They definitely need guys like this. And long term, like, can he play in a playoff series? For sure. Can Dorian Finney-Smith play in a playoff series? For sure. As a 3-and-D wing, to be able to guard just like the Tatums of the world, like even be able to guard like Giannis at times. Like, yeah, this is a nice. I don't think their championship equity grew with this, but again, I had to be complimentary about what they did get back. This is a lot more than I personally thought they were going to get back. To get the picks and 2 like real NBA guys, which these guys definitely are, like real NBA talents, top 100 talents, the higher for some of these guys. Like, that's a good for Kyrie, like not on a contract and stuff, who wanted out. That's a really good haul. I'm really pretty pleased overall. And there's ways you can see them being on a team right this second and plugging in.
And by the way, one of the things, not to jump around a little bit here, but one of the things that was talked about when we're saying, okay, they're willing to trade him, we know the baggage he comes with, the expectations of an extension, et cetera. And what it really came down to was, tell me the desperate teams, right? And that's why we highlighted the Lakers and their situation with LeBron and AD. We talked about the Clippers. But when we talked about Dallas, it was, you're already hearing rumblings from Luka, talking to the front office, hey, he's young. He's not going anywhere. One of the best players in the league. But at some point, he starts to look around and say, when have I had that real legitimate right there on my level kind of player that I've been paired with to have success? So if you're that organization, this is where the needle gets moved on trades, right? Because there's no world where inside of these negotiations, Dallas didn't come with, we've got some salary matches here for you in Tim Hardaway Jr. We'd like to dump Christian Wood if we could. Frank Ntilikina, how does that sound to you, right? And by the way, we also could give you as many picks as we possibly can afford to, if that helps. I'm sure that Brooklyn looked at it and said, and Sean Marks said, no, we want the players in this. And guess what? We'll also take that first and our others, and we can make another move off of that. So while we knew that Kyrie had a lot of leverage in this, as you correctly highlighted last time, when the Kevin Durant situation came up, and different, but the Nets are willing to stare it down. And I think at least in these negotiations too, they must have been willing to say, this is what we're after. And if not, guess what? I have 3 other teams that are at least willing to have the conversations with us. And Dallas, a desperate team, probably want to make sure they got it done as quickly as possible as well to not let somebody else in.
Yeah, like this is, again, it's hard to imagine doing better than this when you come to looking at all this different stuff. And also, and along those 2 lines, I mean, I'll make one more point about Dinwiddie too.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a reason they traded Dinwiddie, because the thing was, they're saying, well, they need a second star. They need a second guy next to Luka. Well, guess who has been the second guy all season next to Luka? Dinwiddie. Yeah. So it's like, so the admission here is that like they knew that this guy wasn't good enough, and to like take them to whatever level they wanted to be. So we have to understand that, right? Like we have to understand that the Nets, if Spencer Dinwiddie is the second best player on your team, like there is a hard ceiling of where your team can be. Mm-hmm. That team was right now the Dallas Mavericks. Now it's the Nets, right? So like there have to be other moves, but I think the key here with this trade, and this goes back to what you're saying, is that like it means we probably already have to start probably reformulating what the idea around this team is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and there's probably 2 tracks that the team is on right now. It's like make Durant happy and make you good enough to like be perceived as a contender, right? Like without being the favorite. I think that is actually, this kind of starts to get you there. If they can package, the first round picks that they just got and turn that into another like real player, like whoever that's going to be. We'll spend this whole week speculating on what that's going to be, because I do actually believe whatever that deal is going to be, all jokes that we made about the trade deadline before, that deal will actually probably go right down to the deadline, right? Because these other players that they're theoretically going to be in on are going to be guys that other teams are going to be in on. Actually, I have one more point about that, which I'll get to in a second. Like just about these picks and where they can go with this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so coming up in a second, we'll tap back into what these picks mean and how it restructures the expectations around the deadline, and then also take a look with Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith coming in. What can the impact be on the roster and rotation, and where can some other players now become tradable assets for the Nets?
All right, it's after the holidays. You're looking to get back on the health kick. You're looking for good, healthy snacking options, or maybe you just need something to step in for a meal. You are going to want to check out Built Bar. We've been talking about Built Bar forever. That's because it's easy. Built Bar has concentrated on the flavors with the stats to back it up. You're not going to want to reach for those candy bars, some of these chips, the other garbagey stuff that you're trying to reach for sometimes with snacks. No, go for Built Bar. Know that you're getting the taste and know that you're getting the stats to back it up with this protein bar. Just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. And then oh my goodness, the flavors: churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. That's just some of the new stuff they've come up with. Cookies and cream, double chocolate. These are not candy bars, folks. These are protein bars that are good for you. You can go to built.com, or you can grab them at Walmart, Sam's Club, really wherever you're picking up big budget, or big ticket food items. That is where Built Bar is going to be. Go to Sam's Club, grab a 13 bar box of the brownie batter and churro. Thank me later, or go to built.com.
Okay. So, quick, go ahead with what they accomplished in these picks, or potentially how it changes the trade deadline before we talk rotations.
Yeah. Okay, great. So here's the one thing, if you had heard us on the pod or on YouTube, and thanks for everyone that's in YouTube. It's just so many people in YouTube right now. Real quick, before we get to the end, if you're in YouTube, the best way you help us right now, go over and click like and subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube. Costs you nothing. We're trying to get to 5,000. With the number of people that are in here today, we might get there today. So go be part of that move.
If everybody does it right now, we're there.
Everyone does it right now, and I'll start talking again once we hit 5,000. Okay. So one thing that we had talked about previously around where the Nets could possibly be in terms of just the trade deadline, where we're like, okay, well, the cabinet in terms of picks and assets is so bare that it was really hard to see how like they were able to work their way into discussion. Now, part of that discussion involved Kyrie Irving being on the team. So like, I get that gets reconfigured. It does get reconfigured here a little bit. It's not, I can't not using the transitive property, just put the last situation onto this situation. But I do actually amend that thinking now, because now they are getting to a point where they have real assets to put back out and actually be competitive in some of these talks with these picks, right? You get like quasi youngish NBA guys that you can put together with contracts, and that saved a lot of money in this deal too. Like I think 21 million or something like that, right? So they save money. Great. If we're all cheering for the owners, and that's good for them. Then also the part where they save money and then they have tradable asset or tradable contracts for younger guys who are good, who make less money, that might be wanting to get out of situations, right? Like, so they actually put themselves in play for a tier of player now that I did not think that they were going to be able to do a week ago. So I just want to make this is like the one more part of this package that they were that actually does put them not anywhere near the front of the line for some of these guys, but at least in the line, which is not a place I thought they were even 48 hours ago, right? So
it's a really good point to make around that. So it's interesting here. We're doing our traditional episode. Obviously, this is going to go up. We're going to stick around. We're going to keep talking about this for a while, and we will reiterate a lot of those possible trade targets. I will throw one out before we're done here, just to kind of tantalize everybody. But when it comes to the rotation, so obviously Spencer Dinwiddie, he plugs in. He's your starting point guard now. And this ties into the deadline as well. Dorian Finney-Smith, do we automatically look at this as it's Dinwiddie, O'Neal, Durant, I guess still Simmons technically right now, and Claxton, but does Dorian Finney-Smith, where do you put him in the hierarchy of players coming off the bench? And does it push down, say, a guy that obviously has been difficult, has the high salary cap hit like Joe Harris? Do we just say, hey, Joe, you're going to start really falling down the pecking order here? It's not a one-to-one, but it's just a matter of functionality in these lineups and realizing that Finney-Smith offers you certainly a better defensive value and still can do some of those things on the offensive end.
Yeah, look, he's the kind of player that is never going to get a max contract, but every team needs. Like that's exactly what Dorian Finney-Smith did. Every team needs this guy, and he's never going to be a $30 million a year guy because he doesn't do enough stuff. But you need guys like this that can just sort of, play the bongos, like play the play the tambourine.
Not all the guitar, boys.
Like you exactly right. And that's not a knock. Like every team has guys like this. Every good team has guys like this. So I think he actually is fine. I think I could see him starting. I probably would start him over, especially this current iteration of Harris. Both of these guys offer some interesting Simmons insurance on the team just being relevant here from now to the end of the season. Like, and I think that, yeah, that's a huge part because they need some Simmons insurance here. Like, it's not, who knows? He's out again. The knee thing is still an issue. He's not playing the next game. I'm pretty sure that's already been reported. So both of these guys, if you're just doing lip service to Durant and the fans and stuff, it's like, hey, we can't really bottom out. And these guys help us be decent at least, right? Like we're an above average NBA team. I mean, definitely. And we're probably a good team when Durant gets back, if not championship caliber with this team right here. Right. So in terms of a rotation, yeah, I'm going to assume that kind of like Simmons is out of this right now for a little bit. And I would say it's Dinwiddie, O'Neal, DFS, Claxton, and who am I forgetting? I guess and Kevin Durant. Right, and then before Durant gets,
it's like everything about guys getting back healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so I think that like that's a situation that you can feel like pretty good about. I actually think there's worlds where with Dinwiddie and another, like with Dorian Finney-Smith replacing one of those smaller guards.
Yep.
And with Royce O'Neal in the lineup, you actually do have a path for like maybe Cam to start because you need the scoring in the short term. Like starting a Cam Thomas and Spencer Dinwiddie backcourt is a little bit more palatable when you have a guy that can go 3 to 5 in DFS, right? And so that actually flexibility would probably allow them to maybe make a starting lineup change like that. We know Seth Curry is going to miss some time here too because he was injured. So I actually think that like if they're able to work them into the mix, those guys are just defensively good enough, and specifically Finney-Smith is long enough and can shoot. I mean, in theory, he should be able to shoot corner threes. I think you actually can make a path to starting Cam and just try to make up some of it with scoring, which I cannot believe I'm saying here. But,
I was going to say, because we're obviously going to extend this, but I got to say, the idea that the Brooklyn Nets would trade Kyrie Irving, and in the byproduct of that, with still more to come, could be talking about having three, including in the short term, Cam Thomas, three guys in the starting rotation that were not, right? Like that's pretty significant because we know what was going on in the absence of Kevin Durant. It was saying, hey, we're trying to piece this thing together. You take out Kyrie Irving and you go, what are we really depending on? We've seen some good games from Seth Curry. We've also seen some clunkers and injuries. We've seen the fading talent, or the fading at least legs or physical presence of Joe Harris, right? Like, so you were looking around the roster and then asking guys like Yuta Watanabe to do more than you really want to have to require of him, and Royce O'Neal. But he's been great, but you're asking him to do significantly more than you ever expected to have to do. So kind of rebalancing this rotation and this roster just through this trade alone is very significant. The other thing that we'll talk about and we'll speculate on, when you say that next tier of what the Nets can go and target, can you give a name as an example? It need not be the one-to-one. We know what fans will do. I'll say one too. We were never going to talk about being able to target an OG Anunoby. Did the assets in this remotely get the Nets closer to that type of conversation? Or even, although he doesn't feel one-to-one anymore, but Gary Trent Jr., well, it feels less likely now, but you certainly have the extra capital to go and pursue somebody a tier above what you thought was possible.
I think they'd still be out on the OG piece,
Yep.
But they'd at least be able to call and not get laughed out of the room. I think that's where they like. I think
it would
Sean,
knock it off.
It would no longer, Majiri, they wouldn't hang up right away, right? So I think that's kind of where they are. I think OG, if he does hit the trade market, which is not for sure, I think they'd be able to at least like say something, and it probably wouldn't get back. I just think some of these other teams where he would plug and play instantly, like Memphis or whatever, would just be, if they wanted to do it, could just go all the way there. And I don't think the Nets have that package. But I do think there's a world, and I think this is where I'm probably going to take a little bit more time. Like, again, we're still pretty close to this. Like, this is not what I thought the Nets were getting back. I do think that it requires a little bit of a recalibration, at least for myself, right? In terms of being like, all right, well, what is the path? Like, because actually I can see three paths here now, and maybe we close it with this, and we'll jump into YouTube and take a bunch of questions, and we're gonna spend this whole week sort of speculating this. I actually think this path offers them this trade offers them three separate paths now, right? Like, there's the one, which is short term, we can make a deal at the deadline and improve it and try to like make a deep playoff run. I think that's on the table.
Yep.
Two, I think they could stand pat with this current team, maybe make it in with a full healthy Durant and Simmons comes back to something. I mean, we didn't even talk about him that much, but like Simmons come back to something, Durant gets healthy, this team could win at least one series in the playoffs, right? Maybe more. I don't think they can win the championship, but I think that's like they could make a decent-ish playoff run. It would take a lot, but they could probably do it. It also offers them real protection on Durant hates this, and he's like, dude, just so you know, end of season, I'm asking out again. Right. Like, and I think this actually protects them a little bit against that also. Mm-hmm. And because I think all three of those things are clearly on the table. And I was actually most worried about that last one, right, in terms of Durant. And I think that this actually offers them not like unbelievable franchises ruined for 10 years downside, right?
Yeah, the blow up, the implosion factor has greatly reduced by adding these two players.
Greatly reduced. Dude, I'm telling you right now, getting anything back for Kyrie like this actually just at least reduces the most extreme version of downside, which is what I was becoming increasingly worried about, right? Which was he leaves for nothing.
There goes Durant.
And that's everybody. And there's no Dinwiddie coming back, and there's no Dorian Finney-Smith, and there's no picks, and there's nothing. Like, that was on the table here. And just to be out of that scary scenario is already a better place. Even if you hated the trade, which I'm sure some people did.
And last thing we'll close out on here. Quick 2 thoughts from me over on YouTube, where I'm telling you right now, we love doing the lives. Be a part of these lives. We are crushing over 1,800 people right now.
This is our biggest one.
In this live. It's incredible. And you only get this far with this many people when you guys show up. So we really, really appreciate it. But ran the poll. How do you feel about the trade? Love the players? 25% are in on that. Love the picks? No one really cares. But the waiting to see the next move at 70%. So it is, you can like the players coming back, but everyone has the expectation of something coming next. And guess what, friends? Jakob Poeltl, that can be back on the table if you want to talk to the Spurs. And that's a needle mover if you're the Brooklyn Nets trying to shore up someone behind Nick Claxton when you cannot trust or rely on Ben Simmons. God, it's a great time to be a Brooklyn Nets.
All right, look. Like we said before, we're going to stick around YouTube probably for a while here. So we have some other network commitments, but we're going to stick around. If you were listening on the podcast, you have to do yourself a favor. You have to go over to YouTube because in the podcast, you're getting about 35-minute episode. On YouTube, you're going to be getting an hour plus. So go and subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube. Thousands of people in here today. We're so appreciative. We're appreciative of the podcast listeners too. Believe me, we can just see them on YouTube. And that's why it just becomes a little more front of mind.
We're very visual learners.
I'm a visual guy and I can see everyone on YouTube. So that's why maybe I just like that a little better. Okay, so make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
And of course, my friends, successful investing takes time, discipline, and patience. Warren Buffet.
Oh, the Oracle of Omaha. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Well, hey, friends, it's the post-podcast podcast. My goodness, man. I think like we're going to reiterate this stuff. If you're in the comments, by the way, as we always say, throw up the @LockedOnNets. We've seen people running around on it. Let's take the circle back. I know we talked about Kyrie a little bit. I didn't want to get too far down the, dissecting the history and how it all got to this place, but it is, of course, a talking point. I know a lot of fans were saying, get him out of here, disgusted with him, probably some more aggressive sentiments than need be made. Do you ultimately say like, you get it? I know we say like from both sides, we can understand it from both sides, but do you understand Kyrie Irving being this adamant about it at this point of the season with everything that's gone on?
Do I understand the trade, like why he asked for the trade request? Well, hold on. I'm going to pause. I want to ask you a question first because I think you and I think like like this because I think you and I think differently about this. I'll answer that in a minute. What were your thoughts when you saw that trade around Kyrie, knowing that Kyrie was not going to be on the Nets anymore?
We do think different.
That comes in. You and I obviously have alerts on everything. We know within 2 seconds, and we race each other to see who can tell the other person around.
I almost lose that every time.
You lose every time, but I did not want to say it myself. That's okay. That's all right. We're partners in crime here. But what was your reaction? Just we've been doing this podcast for a long time, man. Like even before we were on Locked On, we've been covering this. You've been a fan of the Nets for a lot longer than I have. Like, what were your thoughts when you saw that this 3+ year thing had come to a definitive end? Like it was over. He was leaving.
Relief.
Okay.
Like it was relief because I just think that like there's such a push and pull about it. And you and I talk about this. You're always the proponent of the team has gotten worse. When you lose Kyrie Irving, the team has gotten worse. When you lost James Harden, the team got worse. And if it's about trying to pursue championships, the team has taken a step further away from that goal. So like that part of it is brutal, but there is like the pure fan in me. It's like watching that Wizards game. They come back, they're down 23. Cam Thomas Cooks gives a historic performance. And it like fills me up with all of those vibes of like, all right, this is what it's supposed to be like. And by the way, when you're a team that has Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and then James Harden, and then Ben Simmons, you're supposed to feel a lot of that, like a lot of just great vibes, watching the team cook, just totally pummeling teams around the league. I have not had nearly enough of that over the last 3.5+ years and beyond, just in terms of, it was a pure fan. There hasn't been a lot of joy around this franchise. So I think the first thing was relief, which is probably the wrong one if you're doing it like objectively around the goal of winning championships. But I said we talked about the beginning of the year, I said I didn't think that this team was going to win a championship as constituted. So once this goes through, it just feels like that thing that we were all hanging on to that I didn't think was ever going to be achieved. Well, now we just get to take a breath from that and see what happens next. Like, and by the way, I don't know if they'll make that next move that gets me to say, hey, this is once again a championship caliber team, but there's a part of me that's all right with it. And I don't, and this isn't ill will towards Kyrie Irving. Like it's not an ill will towards Kyrie Irving or a judgment on him. It's just, but I said in the offseason too, I know I'm rambling, but I said in the offseason too, if ultimately Kevin Durant wanted the trade and they could find the deal, I said that they should make that deal then as well. And I have no animosity towards Kevin Durant, but it was just wanting the relief from the saga of never being able to solely focus on basketball.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think that like I mostly see it the same way. I think hilariously, or not, however you view this, it's gonna be about probably post trade deadline. I'm gonna say 7 days post trade deadline, maybe over the All-Star break, we get the Kyrie Irving hit piece. Like that will be coming from maybe multiple
and I can
outlets.
do without those.
There will be a massive. I made a joke about this on Twitter, and I had multiple suggestions of who fans already thought was going to write it, which I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to bother saying who those. You could probably figure it out if you follow the Nets. But like we're going to see one of those, and actually will be interesting. I think I generally don't like that. It's like an NBA constant now. It's like some guy asked for the trade, you didn't like him, you were glad you wanted to get him out of there. You do your own PR spin about what a nightmare they were. I actually think the Kyrie one might be more interesting than others. So I will be interested to see it. And that's like watching a car crash. I kind of wish it didn't happen. But I do know that these things kind of go that way. I think I'm with you in terms of just the overall. I think for myself with Kyrie, I think that probably people on the podcast would not be the case here. I think I spent more time defending this guy than most other people, even when I was like so frustrated by it. Right. Because I thought like a lot of his stuff in a vacuum was fine, but in the aggregate, it really was like, okay, what are we doing here? Like the guy clearly has, a bunch of stuff. And I don't know. I think I probably who had, I think like kind of at times, like sort of extreme patience with it. Just because whatever, I think athletes are different. We should never compare ourselves to them. Like we're not high profile celebrity guys. And like, that's just the way it is. Even for me at the end, I was like, all right, it's great for clicks, but like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
It just is what it is. So I think I generally fall into that. And, from a basketball perspective, like my main thing is I want the Nets to be good. It's way more fun to do podcasts about good teams. Like, I think that when you have good players in your teams, it's easier to be good. And, if you're not going to be in a situation like let's say you're doing Locked On Magic right now, those guys are great. Like, that's fun to talk about because you're like dreaming on the Banchero thing. You're dreaming on Franz Wagner. And that's what you're doing. But the Nets were like not in that spot, right? So at that point, with the way the Nets are, we're not dreaming on the upside for future guys. We're dreaming for championships now. Like that's the bill that's been sold. And when you do have guys like KD and when they had him, Harden and Kyrie, like you have to kind of just start thinking about your team in that kind of vein. So trading him does make that tough. But that I think that for me, I know I'm now in a different mode now. I can already feel myself in a different mode around the team being like, okay, like let's win a series. That'd be kind of cool. Right. Like, and maybe that's wrong. Maybe those expectations are too low. I don't really know, but in general, I think I'm with you that I loved watching them play. I did not like talking about the other stuff,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But by the way, too, like I and this is maybe nobody cares about this, but I think over the life of our podcast, like our influence on one another when it comes to the way we think about things, like I can feel it, right? Like, or at least like for myself, like I felt the shift of being way more probably instantly frustrated around things that took Kyrie away from basketball or away from playing. You were willing to go down a little bit further that road. And so over these last 3+ years, like I've gotten to a place where I've separated the basketball from the other stuff. And that means it's okay to not be judgmental around the trade request piece or the negotiations and some things that are purely basketball based. And
by the way, this is, I just be clear. This is stuff we're not just doing this retrospectively. Like we said all this on the podcast. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Like none of this is
walked ourselves through this.
Yeah. We've done this. We've done hours and hours and hours on this, like live and on the podcast. So it's not like anything new.
You mentioned, so there's one thing that I said yesterday, that I wanted to get your opinion on now, because I said, well, even if they make the trade with Kyrie Irving, depending on what comes back, they can still be a team treading the water. They were 5-7 so far without Kevin Durant, few more games to go, that they can still be a team that wins a first-round playoff series and maybe more. Now, at the time, you rebuked it, I think, on the stance of not thinking that this much would come back or that they'd have the capital to make another move. It sounds like you're changing at least your perspective on, hey, this is a team that, as if it was the 4-5, or it matches up differently now with the playing games, etc., but they can win a first-round playoff series even against the likes of a Cleveland. Do you feel differently about that now than you did before this trade?
Oh, yeah. And like, I actually think that they probably go even like a little further. I mean, like, remember Kevin Durant, and almost nobody else was 1 second away from making the conference finals 2 years ago, right? Like, and that team had nobody else by the time it was on. It was him, and I mean, the team was completely gutted by that point, right?
Yeah,
and
James
they
Harden was
almost
playing on half a limb, and
he was, they were gut, and he was just out by the end of it. Like I think, and so like it was just. Durant is that good. Like Durant is that good that peak Durant can actually take you so far. Maybe I'm underselling him to some degree, right? I still don't change my thought process too much. I do think if they are to package these picks into like, I'm gonna have to wait on some of this. I gotta think about who some of these guys would be.
I know. I wanted to throw out like the Pirtle one just because that's been a name that was on the lips of a lot of fans. I don't even know
that one would not change much for me. I don't think, right?
Like, so, but now I do. What's funny about it is now I actually do think there's going to be a different list of players that we talk about that we were never talking about before. Even at the loft, like I mentioned, OG is like, does it get you closer to a guy like that? It gets you closer. Won't get laughed off the phone, but not necessarily. I think there's a different list of names now that haven't been talked about for Brooklyn that they now will be able to have discussions on with the extra capital.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's going to be, I think this week is about to look so much different. I actually thought our week was going to look a very certain way, which was going to be a week long of doing some post games and talking about what the Kyrie Irving situation was. Like by the way, I have a bunch of starred comments up here too.
Okay. Well, just real quick.
No, it's fine. You just didn't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Nah, we'll get there. We've been doing this podcast for a while together. We'll stop cutting each other off at some point. No, but Naz Reid, this is a good example of a name that has been talked about where it seemed like maybe it was getting further away as far as what the Timberwolves are going to want back for it. If the Nets want in on this conversation, they definitely can be in on this conversation now. I think they can maybe even aim a little bit higher if they want to. Like this name is probably a little, or the skill set and the player might be a little bit further down the list now. It doesn't mean they won't go to it, but I think that there can be more names above this, something below the highest possible targets, and then above what feel like guys that are going to be expiring. Teams aren't going to extend, right? So they're looking to get value now. I think they can find something in the middle ground.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely was Joe pessimist on what they were going to be able to get in the trade market. Like I think guys like this are probably available if they want to do it. Again, I think there's a world.
Oh, can they dream on Caruso again? Oh, baby.
Yeah, I guess they could. I
hadn't
thought about it. He got hurt
now. I don't know if that's the guy that I would do it, but
all these guys get hurt around the trade deadline, and then you don't know what's going to happen with him. He just got hurt. He was out the other night, so I got to check on his trade, his injury. But yeah, like guys like this, like they definitely have a few more assets now. I still would be very hesitant, like to just get rid of all the draft capital here, because again, like they still don't have tons. I think they have to thread a needle here where. Like let me put it this way. The player they get back now, I still think has to be like on the youngish side and cannot be a rental. Like if you're dishing out these draft picks, they're just starting to claw back some of their draft equity, like back from the Harden thing. And they got a little bit back from Philly and with Hart, well, the original thing, the Rockets, and they clawed a little bit of it back with Philly, the Philly trade for Harden. They sent another piece out with Royce O'Neal, who whatever. And then now they're getting like a few more back. From Dallas. And by the way, I have one of these starred up here. I'm going to bring this up here. Yeah. Is this? This one was interesting. I had the same thought when I saw this. It was like this pick. Now, look, we're going to be like grandparents.
First reported by Woj as 2027, and then he updated it with it's actually 2029.
Yeah, right. So it's like it's a 2029 first round pick. Like this could be past like the Luka era. Now, look. Again, are we going to be, sitting in the grave at this point? Because these are like, we're talking about 11-year-olds that are like, we want to scout U12 AAU right now if you want to see where this pick is going to be. But like, this could be a good pick. Like Luka might not be on Dallas. I mean, does anyone think that Kyrie's lasting 4 years in Dallas? Like there's almost no chance. And so I just don't, there's worlds where like, these are good picks later, like akin to sort of some of that Lakers stuff. Who knows how this stuff works out? You never know. It's just too far out. My point is, once you start getting this back, I don't know if you're obligated to start sending it right back out right away, unless it was just kind of like real stuff coming back for a couple of years. Guys you knew you could re-sign. They're getting the money a little bit more under control now. Like, I just would be a little hesitant to just do it all unless I was sure that the guy coming back.
So here, well, I'm gonna highlight this one real quick here, which was Joe Harris, Seth Curry, and a first-round pick for Gordon Hayward. I went vomit on myself live on the podcast if that was the scenario that played out. And I'm not knocking you for throwing it out there, but I don't need the injury-prone $30 million player with $30 million on the books next year. It just there's no, yeah, that's not the guy. That's not the one.
The guy's always he's hurt all the time.
He's hurt all the time. Exactly. Like, but what I will say is, I think
just got real quick on Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward has not topped 60 games in a season since 2017.
There you go.
So it's 6 years. I mean, it's all, and I know one injury was the freakish one in his first game with Boston, but he's not. Oh no, I take that back. I was looking at games started. Okay, he did top the next year. He got to 72, but only started 18 because they were working him back from injury. He hasn't played more than 52 in 4 years. So, and it's going to end up going down every year. So anyway, no, that's a no for me.
Yeah. So the first thing, but the one thing I did want to offer, because I said, you asked me, how'd you feel? Relief.
Yeah.
And what you don't, I think you're right. What you don't want the relief of that, and this is for the organization, is to then turn into the impetus or panic of, and now we need to go do, right? If there is a name out there and the additional capital gets you there, great. If not, you can still go back to that same marketplace in the off season when Katie is still under control and you've seen what this version of the team looks like for the rest of this year and the playoffs. Okay, what would be the next thing we need to add, right? Because even though you know the skill sets and you know the talents that you got back here, there's the world where you can't move Joe Harris before this deadline, but you can move him in the offseason where you see how Dorian Finney-Smith performs. Where is Spencer Dinwiddie, right? How do some of the other players off him? Cam Thomas. What if Cam Thomas does get, as Doug suggested, if Cam Thomas gets some short starting run here in the backcourt with Spencer Dinwiddie and it looks like he can do it, that changes what you think or where you want to go in the market. So I think you're correct in saying, like, this doesn't have to be you go do it. It looks like it's lining up that way, but I wouldn't feel like you're compelled to, you have to go make that move right now for this year, because this year could be a crapshoot. And it does lead me to a question about Ben Simmons as well.
Yeah. And it's so funny too, because like the Nets, again, they're never going to be, you never make this. I was just looking up our friends at FanDuel where the championship odds have gone here. You never make this move.
Dallas, but not significantly.
Here's the thing. Like you never make this move and think you're getting better. You don't, right? Like, and if you were a fan of Kyrie Irving, and again, we said we were from a basketball perspective, like, and whatever, like, it seems like a good guy too. He's just got his like quirks or whatever.
I got
weird
friends too, man.
It's like, so I do think you're never gonna get better. I know there's a camp that's out there. It's like they should have given him a 4-year max contract. I know that there's people out there that wanted to have done that. I actually will tell you, I was talking to my wife about this. She does not care at all, but I was willing to just keep good, like to go on and on about it and talking about, like, I had actually talked myself into be like, I can see it. I can see offering in the max. He's that good. He's that good. Like you maintain championship equity with stuff around him. Like, and I could have made it. Yeah. I know you couldn't, but I could make a pretty strong case to do it and to live with the downside risk of whatever next thing is a problem for him. It's a problem for everybody. Like, I get it. And he's just that good. I hate to say it, but I don't even hate to say it. It's just true. He's that good. And when you have players that good, it's impossible to replicate them. You cannot piece them together. You can't moneyball this thing. You can't moneyball this thing back together like the Oakland A's back in the day.
X number of points, X number of rebounds.
It doesn't work like that in basketball. There's not enough opportunities. The game isn't set up this way. You have to have the best players. Like you can't. Your ceiling is. This is why. By the way, this is why Dallas wants him. Dallas is making they're taking a gambit the other way and saying, we get it. We are very aware of everything that's happened. Luka is this good. Kyrie is this good. We have Jason Kidd. Maybe we can fix him or we can get him on board or whatever. Like, I get that gambit. Like, it makes sense.
Well, and by the way, like, and not that maybe Dallas was ever in the position of potentially having to be concerned about losing Luka. Maybe they were. But think about it in terms of the Nets signed Kyrie. Why? Because it means landing Kevin Durant. And they knew then all of the risks that signing Kyrie Irving came with. And guess what? Some of those things came up. It didn't work out. And this idea, because I've heard this, a national media narrative has been very clear on who's going to take this guy, who would ever. You're never going to learn your lesson. Oh, he'll be different with us. Of course, everyone's got that because he's that good. You're always going to say maybe he'll be different with us. Why? Because he's not the 123rd best player in the NBA. he is one of, as I see lists the other day about top 25 guys, and he's not there. He's somewhere in that conversation, in that spectrum. One of the top, 5 guards guards in the league, wherever you want to list them. He's one of those guys. He's one of those talents. And when you're a team, especially, I'll say, like a smaller, I'm saying it's small market, but Dallas, you take a swing like this because if it works out, it's a championship. If it doesn't work out, you reboot and you reset yourself. And that is a little bit different, I think, than where the Nets were or where LA would be right now with LeBron James. You get Kyrie, if you don't win the championship, it's a nightmare scenario. Certain teams can approach this stuff differently. And I think Dallas, unlike even the Phoenix, I would say, was in a unique position of being like, yeah, the desperation and the risk is worth what the reward could be. And they're going to end up being, I'll ask you this little sidebar. Where does Dallas have to get to this year now? Do they have to be in the finals, or is Western Conference Finals enough?
Do they have to be in the finals? No, I don't think they have to be in the finals to feel like this made this work. I actually don't think from Dallas's point of view, they sent out
that it's not about this year.
Yeah, and I don't think from their point of view is like, this is worth the risk, right? It's like, you have a great player. It's super hard to get great players. Like, you need a very specific kind of guy to play with Luka, right? Like, and I mean, in terms of skill, like, you need to be able to play
one of the best backcourt pairings in the league now.
Oh, totally. It might be the best. Like, It actually just might be the best backcourt pairing. Like, so, and like, you need a very specific guy. Kyrie's already shown he can play tons off ball with a on ball creator. He did it with Harden. It worked perfectly. Like, it worked great. I mean, Luka's not like Harden, but there's like some similarities in like how he wants to break down defenses, how he wants to get into his switches, he's like put a step back into his bag that's like looked amazing. And then by the way, and you can also like find scoring opportunities. Like, Dinwiddie was still averaging 18 points a game here on 40% from 3 with over 6 attempts a game. Some of that's boosted because Luka missed a bunch of time and Dinwiddie was super high usage in those games. But like, oh yeah, like, you can tell yourself a total story about this one. Maybe they already know they're going to re-sign him because like they feel very confident with him. Nico Harrison has had like a long history with him. Jason Kidd obviously is a point guard guy, and like there's a million ways you could tell yourself this story if you're Dallas, right? So I think from that point of view, I don't mind the deal. I can't remember where we started with this because now when we get to the live portion of YouTube, we start.
What they needed to accomplish.
Oh yeah. You know what's so funny? I can't find them in the. Oh yeah, so never. I'm just not looking very well. So right now, championship odds on our friends at FanDuel. Boston, it's at plus 280. Bucks, Nuggets, Sixers, Grizzlies, Warriors, then the Mavericks. So Mavericks are 7th. Nets are 10th. It's actually higher than I thought. So Nets are above the Suns, above the Pelicans, above the Heat, above the Lakers. That's interesting to me. I actually first of all, I didn't even think they'd have this up this quickly. Second of all,
right.
but FanDuel does it better than me. And so it's almost like they're a real business that does.
They're running an operation around this thing.
It's like they had a bunch of quants that have figured this out. So yeah, I mean, the fact that the Nets are 10th, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I think there's a world where they can make a move here that would push them up to like 6th, right? Or something like that.
What is the player archetype that you would want them to add here at the deadline? Like, knowing you have Dinwiddie, let's assume that Finney-Smith maybe is a flexible. Let's just say, you have Dinwiddie now as your point guard. What is the guy that you think that like the type of player that you'd want them to add now? Without Kyrie.
In this version, is Simmons like?
Oh, hold on. Let me ask a different question. Never mind that one. What do you think happens now with Ben Simmons? Because that's way more interesting. Because we'll talk.
Well, what's so funny? How quickly we've forgotten about this guy. It's like nuts. It's like it's kind of sad.
By the way, thank you, Kyrie Irving, right? Because you took one thing off my mind. Now listen, you put a whole other load of stuff on there, but at least it wasn't how disappointing Ben Simmons has been this year. Remember, to your point, it was only a week ago, and I went back and watched that video clip of Jacques Vaughn. Hard to determine if he was giving a little eyebrow raise like to the reporter and the way that he was answering it, or a little eyebrow raise around, yeah, man, this guy with his knee and not being able to play. Do you think that, like, is there any world where the Nets are like, maybe the extra capital is capital that helps us unload a $35+ million contract of Ben Simmons at the deadline? And it's not about another player move. It's just about getting off of this last thing. You took it on in the Harden trade, and you can get out from underneath that and significantly reset your cap room timeline going to the offseason if you've you already saved money with this trade as it is. You can clear another 30 plus.
I mean, I don't think you can be in the business of attaching assets to unload a negative contract right now. Their team is not in that spot. And so I think there will be opportunity for this later, almost definitely. So I don't think you can do that. But I think you still have to just hope and wish that he gets better. I don't know another path for them for this season, at least. I think that's something to explore later. The value literally could not be lower now. So I think you maybe talk yourself into like, hey, we might trade him. It's almost difficult to imagine his value being lower than it is right this second, right? Like he looked bad. He's now been hurt. He hasn't played. He'll have barely played leading into the trade deadline, even if he comes back this week. Like, there's just no scenario of where his value is any lower than it is today. So I don't think at that point you can think about trading him unless you just saw something.
Well, no, this isn't about Ben Simmons. It's totally different. Shout out to, man, I do not want to miss you. Where are you? Don't let me lose track of you in the feed here. I got you. Gerard, you just shouted it out inside of the chat. Now I will confirm the information that was reported over on Twitter. This is through Alex Sturm, but it's from Ian Begley from SNY. The reporting that the Nets are engaged with the Toronto Raptors on a subsequent deal that, well, now I want to make sure we say this right. Could be Sturm is saying Siakam, Anunoby, or Gary Trent Jr., and it looks like that is what Ian Begley is also discussing. So one of those players, I'm going to tell you right now, in a world where the Brooklyn Nets are capable of shooting as high as Pascal Siakam at this deadline, you may see the first time ever where a podcast host passes out live on air.
You want that trade?
For Siakam? Yeah, I mean, I think Siakam's
I just
phenomenal.
was making sure. I just didn't sure which way you were passing out, from glee
from like joy or elation or just general excitement over it. Yeah, like, and here's what's funny, because you and I had talked about OG so much, and I think you had said, and I still agree with you, he's making like a little over 17 million now. I don't know if you want to be the team that pays him the next max contract, right? Like there's some risk reward there. Siakam's had a little bit of injury stuff with him, but his game has taken like a different type of step over the last season and a half. Like, Siakam and Kevin Durant, that's interesting. Now, the real question about this report on a subsequent deal, man, my head is all over the place right now. When you list Gary Trent Jr. or OG, I think, oh, assets that the Nets just acquired that they can flip into maybe one of those players. When you mention Pascal Siakam, that then makes it sound more like a Kevin Durant type of base deal, because it'd be hard for me to think that 2 first-round picks and some other stuff gets you Pascal Siakam.
And this was Alec, I think, just saying names that they could possibly.
That's why I said, like, it didn't look
funny
like Ian Begley didn't mention it specifically. So
yeah. If you look at the way, sorry, I went into the microphone there. If you look at the way, like, Toronto is interesting because kind of no one knows what their plan is, and every player you could either see getting traded or you could see them standing pat. Like, it's very unclear. Like, I've heard Van Vliet's name brought up in a ton of stuff because like he would help improve a lot of teams,
right?
Maybe even like short term improve them more than Siakam right now. OG obviously has been discussed as like a trade target for a lot of different teams. He might be on his way out, but no one really knows with them. So I'd be surprised if they were all the way there on the package. I think with Siakam, they'd be wanting like someone good back. And I'm not sure the Nets have that guy right now. And so it'd be
hard to think of the Nets roster with something of that caliber.
I thought Ernest made a good point here.
Yeah. For sure. Dude, by the way, it's why we do the podcast, because we're on. Yeah.
I'll put a real one up here. Hold on a second. There we go.
You know what I wonder sometimes? Just real quick. I wonder sometimes, like, when we talk about covering the Nets, like I listen to other people that cover the Nets, and I think a lot of people do a lot of great jobs. I think of us as being like fairly even keeled, balanced perspectives on the team. So I'd hate to see how some people feel about other guys that might go a little bit further. Anyway,
I think we probably get. I will say, I think we could probably get considerably less hate than other people out there.
That's true.
I do think the Nets. I do think the Nets. I think we're lucky. I think a lot of teams are like this, but the Nets do have, especially like guys that have been on our podcast. We got a million great guys like Matt Brooks, Eric Slater, Chris Mahalan. Like, these guys that cover the Nets are the best. And they're not covering it for the ESPNs of the world, but they're doing the same, if not better, a job than those guys. And I think we're lucky in Nets world us
It's a good
aside,
community. Yeah, it's a good
yeah,
community.
there's a good, the glue guys are great. Brooklyn Buzz, like all these guys, there's such a good community, I think, of people doing stuff, and I'm pretty level headed. So I think, but I did that one came through like 30 minutes ago and I was dying. Do we still look to trade Joe Harris and some picks for a power forward center? Who is that player? This has been some version of this has been a question for months now. What do you think here?
I mean, Joe Harris is a contract. It's a money matching right now. So yes, if you can find a team that you can send one of the first round picks, the Nas Reed one, hey, we're going to dump Joe Harris's contract onto you. Like, that's part of the deal, right? If you're someone that liked Mo Bamba, that's part of the deal, is taking this away, because with the addition of Dorian Finney-Smith, with Spencer Dinwiddie, with maybe what Cam Thomas could do, even Evan Sumner, which, by the way, I highlighted how awesome I love his responses in post games, where his entire attitude is like, I'm getting sick and tired of everyone saying like, oh man, were you surprised you were able to like step up and score baskets at an NBA level? He's like, no, because that's what I'm here to do. And I serve a different role behind superstars as opposed to when they're out. But no, I think even at his best, even the best version of Joe Harris, his role can be reduced here with the players that you've brought in and what their skill sets are. So yes, I think they would like to, but this again is the old, you take my trash for one of your treasures, and those are hard deals to make.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced that they need a center at all. So, because I just still like Claxton, I think with the right pieces around him, like they have a center. So I don't know why.
I'm not like need to get for a center specifically to this question. Like, it's not about needing a center. It's just about, do you want to move off the money if you could, really?
Yeah. I do think there's like some big men that would pair okay. I mean, you've seen too, the last couple games, they have specifically played Claxton and Sharp together. It's not been very long. It's been like 2 or 3 minutes. Like, that's it. But they've definitely done it. And it wasn't garbage time. It was like they overlapped those minutes on purpose, I think, to be like, hey, because like Sharp he wants to take threes like every once in a while. So I think they've tried to do that a few times to like sort of see what they have. It lasts for like 2 minute stretch and that's it. But
Sean Marks did say, when they asked about, this is going back a couple of weeks now, we talked about what are you going to do with the deadline, he said, well, specifically around a big, he said, we do like what we have. We want to see Day'Ron get a legitimate run to see what he's capable of doing. And sometimes you think, you have Day'Ron Sharp, but they have done it of late. So there is some process here where you're seeing a little bit more of him. So more than anything, I just think, to me, it'd be about shedding the money now as opposed to anything else.
I have one more that I want to throw up here, just as it's like a follow-up around the center thing. This is Brendan. It says, if we get a good backup big like Jakob or Nas Reed, can we be legit title contenders again? So one thing that's, I think sometimes, this is a good question by Brendan, and people ask this version of this question a lot.
Yeah.
I think a backup center makes them a better regular season team, but it's important to remember, like, adding guys like this, the only way you get better as a playoff contender is if you can imagine that person in your closing lineup. Because remember, when it comes to the playoffs, I'm thinking like at max about 7 guys, right? Like, because I have a 7 or probably max 8 guys. Like, that's the rotation. And any guy that, if you're just thinking in terms of championship equity or whatever, the player has to be a player that you can imagine playing in the playoffs. Would these guys make them better like regular season team? Yeah, of course. Yes. Like they would, but I would stop where I think about legit title contenders again, because I just don't know if I see these guys playing like 32 minutes in a championship game. And that's, I think, a big difference in those questions. So do you want to be like a better constructed, bigger team to deal with the problems of the regular season and maybe be able to bang bodies against the biggest Embiids of the world, who, by the way, Claxton did pretty well on last time they met in Philly? Yeah, that's different, because like anyone that increases your championship odds has to be a guy that you can be like, hey, this guy can play. Let's make it for a big. He can play 28 minutes in a championship game. And I just don't know if these are those guys, right? Like, and especially when you have Claxton too. So I think that's where I stop with these kind of like this kind of. It clearly would make them better as a team. I don't know if it would make them better as a champion.
No, because I think, and there's one thing I want to highlight here too before we go, because I actually had this thought earlier. You said, like, say it's 8 players, right? When you get to play 8 players, if you're going to your 9th and 10th player with significance, like significant minutes, it means that your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 aren't good enough, right? Like, at some point you need to be going with what the best version of you is. That's Nicholas Claxton. It's Kevin Durant. It's Spencer Dinwiddie, etc. So I think just drilling down on your point, some of the innings, the inning eaters thing doesn't matter as much when it comes to changing title contention. It matters staying healthy through the regular season, and it matters maybe having a guy that can come in an instance where foul trouble comes up. But those are kind of your worst case scenarios when you have to go to that next guy down the depth chart. This one I just thought was interesting from Gary, because he said, do you think we'll see more continuity with this team? I'm just relieved I don't have to watch hero ball as much anymore. The only thing that I really liked about this was the continuity piece. The team is not better without a superstar talent like Kyrie Irving. However, I remember when we said, when they finally were putting together like the big three, and it was like right as the NBA was like starting to move away from like the big three, and it was mostly about having the superstar, the strong number two, and great complementary pieces. I will say, when Kevin Durant comes back healthy, I do like the idea. It's like the Edmund Sumner line. We all know what our role is here. Like, we all know what we're supposed to be doing here. You will take some level of guesswork around expectations. Now, there'll be games and matchups when it looks worse because you don't have a Kyrie to take over at times. But I think continuity, if we want to put that term to it, yeah, I think there will be better continuity because everyone's gonna know exactly what their expectations are. It's not going to be a game-to-game change around what you need to be.
Yeah, you know what's so easy to forget? I agree with you on some level. Okay. But I'm going to point to something where it's so easy to forget something that just happened. All right. If you go back to December, hold on one second. What was it? Yeah, let's say, okay, it was,
guys, we're making a great point now.
December 31st. The Nets had just won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They had just won 10 games in a row.
Yeah.
Everyone was healthy.
Yep.
They were like up to like third in championship odds. Katie was up to like third in MVP odds.
Remember those days?
And well, I'm saying it to remind us to not rewrite. I'm guilty of this too. Like, I'm just had to just go back and think about this for a second. It's very easy to quickly rewrite history because of the thing that happens, right? So when we talk about like hero ball and all this stuff, like, remember, we are less than we're a month and 5 days less. I mean, this is a month and a second. So we're less than a month and 3 days from, they had just beat the Spurs 139 to 103 and just looked like everything was clicking. And it looked like, Simmons was back and that it was all kind of working together. And that you're like, I can see it. I can see it here. Like, this is the version we were talking about. I mean, the wheels have completely came off the track since then. But I guess my point where it's like, we get back to hero ball, like, they weren't really doing that in the best version of this team. They were just like they were a good balanced team that could just absolutely smoke you on offense. And
that's why I think I focused on.
We're forgetting it now. We're forgetting it now because Durant. Me too, by the way. We're forgetting now because Durant's been hurt and Simmons is dead, and Simmons and Kyrie's traded, and like it all went to pot really, really fast. We are really only like a month away, from like being like, good luck, NBA.
Like, by the way, it's like this is like, if you follow the show, like, this, but it's like it's almost like I'm almost embarrassed. And we talked about this, like you and I, we talked about it on the podcast, but even off, it's like, man, like, look at this team, look how they're playing, whatever. We're like, too, like, they're back in. We've asked the question on the podcast: is this team now, one of the odds-on favorites to potentially challenge to go to the finals in the Eastern Conference? Like, we had those discussions, and all throughout it, it was like you. And by the way, you have to do this. You have to turn your mind off to the fact that this team has only ever gone a month and a half at most, maybe 2 months, without having something come up that derails what we think is the best version of them. But I fall underneath the aroma. I drink every time. It's like I'm ashamed of myself because in the last 3.5, 4 years, every time, this is the equivalent of being in a cult and them giving you suicide Kool-Aid. Somehow you drink it and still survive. And the next week, and you come back and you go, oh, Kool-Aid? Don't mind if I do. You keep
delicious.
on drinking.
Delicious. I know everyone else is dead, but man, is this stuff good.
Man, yeah,
it's just so funny. It's just a reminder to how quickly the world turns, right? Like, the world turns really fast. It doesn't take much. Sometimes it's someone banging into Kevin Durant's knee, or it's, Simmons' knee flaring up, or Kyrie not getting the extension. Like, this stuff just comes really, really quickly. And again, like, I cannot believe that was like a month ago, right? Like, this is not long ago.
So 2 quick things. Here's one quick one. Yeah, it's a way better deal. guess what? That wasn't something that could happen. So that's why it was a better deal. The other really good deal that I
Kyrie
loved
for Luka, I would have done Kyrie for Luka if we're just like in the, like,
I would have done the LeBron and AD for Kyrie was one that I was pretty in on too. No, but that's a good reminder also about Ben Simmons, who over the last few weeks, by the way, in the last few weeks, he actually had one of his best performances as a Brooklyn Net, but also was surrounded around the injuries and some really bad games. There was a brief stretch where he's never been close to what we wanted or expected him to be. But there was also has been a run where you go, hey, this version of Ben Simmons, okay, we can work with that. It's been few and far between. So that's also the good reminder of when I say, hey, could they maybe dump his contract? We know he's not 100% healthy. We know there's issues there. But there is still a long way to go in this season that Ben Simmons can still get to some version of himself. And that is what's interesting about the Nets right now. It's like, how are they thinking about all these different layers to what's going to inform the choices they make at the deadline? And I will wonder, because we said about the specifically Dinwiddie and Finney-Smith, you're safeguarding potentially against what Ben is or is not. I'll be curious about the moves they make and how it looks relative to, can we trust or rely on Ben Simmons over the back end of this season in the playoffs? Because there is a world where they say, well, how do we construct a roster that does, for all intents and purposes, does not have Ben Simmons as a critical contributor? Because they may be trying to figure that out as well in the short term over this season.
And just to push the other way, there's a world where on Tuesday we're doing the Kevin Durant requested a trade podcast. Like, there's a lot of ways
that just yet, but yeah,
I'm just saying that life can come at you really fast here. Yep. And sometimes life comes at you slow. But if we're just talking about all the different ways, it's never as good as you think it is. And it's never as bad as you think it is either. Right. And I think that's a good point about Simmons. It's like, hey, we shouldn't evaluate the Simmons situation based on the last week, because if we had evaluated 1 month ago, we would have had a very different evaluation. So it's better to sort of aggregate those. And I'm saying this to myself as a reminder, it's better to aggregate those opinions. But what's that? God.
No, it's just, you said that thing about Kevin Durant. And I was like, at the top of the show, we expressed that by getting this deal done so quickly, it gives you time to go to market and make that next move with the capital you've gained. It also does leave time to go to market and find the right deal for Kevin Durant.
That's got to be on the table. There's reports from, Christian Winfield had it that Kevin Durant's not enamored with Ben Simmons. That doesn't come from nowhere. Winfield's a plugged in guy, right? This is not, he's not like a clickbait kind of guy. Christian Winfield does a great job. And he puts that out there because that's probably real on some level. And right. So
the one thing I'd say about Kevin Durant too, because for the most part, we say who he is as a person, as a player, right? Wants to play ball. The one area that I could see him when it comes to Ben Simmons is just being like, this dude is not it. I'm talking from a pure basketball standpoint. By the way, it's why I was still mostly in Kyrie's corner, because he is that dude from a basketball standpoint. Definitely. So I don't care about everything else. I care about when I go to play basketball, is the other guy on the court and the other guys on the court, are they going to be capable of helping me lift? If not, then it does become a problem. So it's a really fair point. When he gets out there and plays and he just says, I've got a guy that I'm setting up in and around the basket and he flat out cannot get it done, that's a problem for me. That's why, by the way, it's why I've only grown to love Nick Claxton more and more as he develops, because he and I are developing the chemistry and the rhythm, and we're seeing the results, right? And that is actually a really good, or bad, depending on your opinion, perspective to be happening right now simultaneously. Kevin Durant is seeing the shell of Ben Simmons not develop with him, and the emerging talent of Nicholas Claxton only get better and better with him.
And remember, Durant is not too far away from having said, kind of making a weird call about who he wasn't playing with, right? In that Haynes interview where he was like, I'm playing with Edmund Summer and these guys, right? And it wasn't a compliment.
Right? Didn't mean that as he wasn't raising the banner for Edmund Summer.
And there's a world where he looks around at this roster right now and says to the whole thing, says, this isn't it.
And he's been highly complimentary of Dorian Finney-Smith, in recent whatever. I think he likes, again, go back to this top of the trade. I think that getting Dorian Finney-Smith, at least in the short term, that mattered in the sense of for whatever it's worth, Kevin Durant has spoken highly of Dorian Finney-Smith. That's important to get him back, as opposed to say Christian Wood, where Kevin Durant might say, like, what do I want this dude for? Like, you have to find a way to try to, navigate the waters of satisfying or at least putting something on the table that Durant can say, I can wrap my head around this.
All right, we're gonna wrap this up here in a second. I actually am. I really don't want to wrap this up because there's so many people in YouTube right now that I have a network commitment here in like 5 minutes to do. So I'm gonna have to jump off. This is easily the most people we've ever had in YouTube. Don't like that's we're just it blows us away, man. Like we love talking Nets basketball. Adam just read something that I sent him on air. So we love talking Nets basketball. When we started, talking about the Nets a while ago, we were just like, hey, will anyone listen? That was the whole question. And like to have thousands and thousands and thousands of people over the course of this episode be in here talking. And they look, it's not because of us, it's because of Kyrie Irving and the Nets and Kevin Durant. Like we totally get it. But the part where everyone is in here, like we're really, really, really appreciative of that. It's awesome. And just going to remind you, if you are in here right now, to subscribe to the Locked On Nets podcast. You're already in the channel, so all you got to do is hit subscribe. We picked up a lot of subscribers today, but we're trying to get to 5,000. You can help get us there. Make sure you hit subscribe.
And I'm just highlighting Richard's comment. This will be something that we talk about, right? The communication with Kevin Durant, what he is looking to see happen here. Is there a target that he wants to go after? And how will that inform what Sean Marks and the Nets try to do ahead of this deadline? It's all fascinating, man.
Look, man, this NBA stuff comes at you fast and furious. There's some world, it is unlikely, where there's another emergency podcast. Like you can't even sleep. I'm sitting in the parking lot. I'm thinking about doing a live from the truck as I'm waiting for my kid outside. This is like the world we live in now. I'm like, my kid's inside doing something. I'm going to go live from the truck right now. I'm not going to be home for 90 minutes. Like this is crazy. This is the kind of NBA world you live in right now. So you're sitting there, you're waiting for their friends battle of the bands to, at the end, and you're thinking, what are you doing with your life? And then the Kyrie Irving gets traded. So,
like Doug said, we appreciate everybody being in here. We had up almost to 2,800 people in here live, still over 2,000. This is the hard part. You can't peel me away from moments like these. But if anything else happens, Doug and I have, we've really sent out the message to our families. Don't touch us. Don't come near us. Don't talk to us. It's kind of just going to be waiting out until the deadline to see what happens next with Brooklyn. And we will, of course, be back in talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.